Welcome, Wargamers, to the often incomprehensibly deadly Mortal Realms, because today we are taking a story straight out of the Stormcast Eternals Battle Tome. It's been a while since I touched this book here, because there is a tale in here that was pointed out by a viewer in a comment, and this was a long time ago, so I apologize. I don't have your username anymore. But it is a weird story. So in just a second, we're going to read the story together, unpack it, and just kind of try to guess as to what this story could be referring to. I'm assuming it is releases yet to come. But really quickly, before we jump into that, I would just like to say, if you're interested in Age of Sigmar or really any Games Workshop games, please consider using my affiliate link in the description down below, because Not Just Gaming is an awesome store on the East Coast, United States, with up to 30% off savings for Games Workshop products. They ship fast and they are awesome. Using that link goes a long way to supporting me, the channel, my wife, our cats, all of it, and I'm so grateful for everyone who does. And so let's get into our story. This comes, like I said, from the Stormcast Eternals Battle Tome on page 23. It's simply called The Black Star. Throughout Ulgu's Shadrach convergence, 3 words are whispered in terror: the Black Star. None know whether this bizarre orb is demon, god beast, or something else entirely. It slowly floats across the lands, turning those it crosses into feral creatures whose voices strain in rapturous song. The free cities of Duskhenge and New Sidoria fall to this cruel fate. But when the Black Star and its chanting disciples reach the city of Hallenwald, they find the Kalabex's Sacrosanct chamber of celestial warbringers awaiting them. Having used their mastery of heavenly portents to plot the orb's path, the warbringers had time to evacuate Hallenwald and assemble a procession of raving fanatics. Through their unbreakable faith in the God King, the Sigmarites are able to resist the entity's lure. While the Stormcast wield their magics to repel frenzied hordes, the chanting flagellants lure the Black Star through a realm gate linked to the etheric void, ending its malice, for now at least. This is one of those stories where you definitely have to be like, what the heck did I just read about? And honestly, I like it. If nothing else, it just reminds us that we don't have to have everything nailed down in Age of Sigmar, right? I feel like in 40k, there's a lot less room for crazy random stories because so much of their lore has been filled out to basically explain every nook and cranny of things. But this is one where we're like, I don't even know what we're looking at. Like, even within the story, they're like, I don't know what the heck that is. And if you don't know what it is, how'd you track it? And so let's go through this story one more time here. I'm just going to kind of fill in some details so we can get a fuller picture of what's going on. The location this is happening is Ulgu's Shadrach Convergence. This is essentially a small location, or not small, but relative to the size of the realm. It's a particular location within Ulgu, the realm of shadows. It's only described as a bizarre orb, so that could be a lot of different things. They mention here a demon, which, sure, it seems like an odd shape for the demon to take, but okay, I'll give you that. A god beast? Okay, depending on its size, they didn't really mention its scale, but most god beasts are like flippin' huge. Or something else entirely. Now, I'm going to lean with something else entirely. One possible explanation for this, especially given that this book is an AOS 3.0 book, meaning it's after the events of the Broken Realm series, it could certainly be an incarnate. What would the incarnate of Ulgu look like? Now, I don't have a strong answer for that. I have no idea. But all we know about this thing is it's centered around an orb, a singular point. Well, if you look at the incarnate of Gur model and you read the lore behind them, the incarnates require a large piece of realm stone to kind of anchor them into reality. If you shatter the stone, the incarnate will dissipate. Kind of like an endless spell, falling apart. So what would that look like in Ulgu, right? So let's say this singular point, the Black Star itself, is a piece of realm stone, and the shadows that wreath around it are that of the monster, the incarnate, that is using it to fuel itself. I think that's a fairly reasonable theory, but it still leaves a lot of room for interpretation. Because, for example, we know that as people get closer to the incarnate of Gur, the magics of Gur infuse them more and more. So, like, hardened warrior veterans will become more feral and primal and break rank and all these kinds of things. Well, what would that look like in Ulgu? I don't actually know, but the effects that we see this thing kind of permeating around it are interesting. because it almost seems to create a kind of zealotry. It slowly floats across the land, turning those it crosses into feral creatures whose voices strain in rapturous song. Now, I don't know much about shadow magic. I don't typically get a lot of zealot themes from it, though. Then again, if I was to be super bland about it and say, what does, shadow magic do on people, it would just make them hide, which is very anticlimactic for a war game, so I understand not just doing that. But it inspires them somehow. It brings out this faithfulness devoted solely to the Black Star. And what's interesting is it not only is something that affects people, but it's also calculable. And that's an interesting side note, and what makes me think it has probably more to do with an incarnate, where it's a naturally occurring thing. They can look at maps and see realmstone deposits and track, kind of where the winds of magic might go. Because if it was a demon or a god beast, how would they be able to pinpoint where it's headed? I don't have an answer for that one. That's up to you guys. Go ahead and throw it in the comments if you have a good idea. But if it's a realmstone thing, maybe they could kind of get a sense of where it could be headed next. And so the Stormcast are deployed. A Sacrosanct chamber is there. They evacuate an entire city. Of course, the monster or whatever is still headed towards it, and they just set up a defense. But the way that they attack it is very interesting. So instead of just having an army there, thinking, oh, this thing is collecting soldiers and stuff, we'll treat it like a traditional military threat with a standing army of liberators and stuff. They treat it as if it is a uniquely magical and religious experience. So if you're not familiar, the Sacrosanct chamber is the second to last chamber of the Stormcast to open up, and is specifically regarding the wielding of magic. After the Necroquake went nuts, magic was running rampant, and so Sigmar released them, and they are Stormcasts that are specifically trained to deal with magical threats, be they endless spells, armies wielding magic, etc. So they were, at least by sending these guys, acknowledging this is an arcane problem. Which is good, because I can imagine if everyone who goes near this thing goes insane, it's probably hard to get recon. So the fact that they know what they're dealing with and send the right kind of soldiers is actually quite nice. But that second element that they bring in, the religious one, they bring in the zealots, the fanatics, the flagellants, who we've seen crop up in the background of lore several times, even though, as a sub-faction, they got gutted and lumped in with other things. I am very interested in the flagellants as a unit. If you don't recall, during the first age of expansion, when the initial cities of Sigmar were reclaiming territories, the zealots used to do this thing where they would cut themselves and thrash themselves and basically hurt themselves to bleed, and their blood, because they are so intensely, single-mindedly devoted to Sigmar, would cleanse whatever it touched. So they would bleed themselves to purify the land of chaos, which is a little bit backwards if you think about it, but whatever. And so it's so strange to me that not strange, but interesting that they brought both a religious one that's based on belief as a strength to them, and then also the magic wielders to be like, we have no idea what this thing is, but it's going to fall into one of these two categories, and we're going to nick this in the bud. Now, I wish we had more details on the battle, and maybe if the story ever shifts to Ulgu, they'll pick up this thread later on about what happened to the Black Star, what it was, whatever. But what's interesting to me is that they didn't actually go into the story of the battle anymore, because all we know is that they didn't actually defeat whatever it was. In this case, if it was a incarnate of Ulgu, they would have to shatter whatever that center thing is, the realm stone core. They instead lured it into a realm gate that basically dumped it into the blackness of space, which is not the same thing as killing it necessarily, depending on what it is. Again, they went toe-to-toe with it. It was right there in front of them, and no one can still tell you what the Black Star is. But the reason I wanted to know more about that fight is, what happened when the Black Star left? So we know that it went to at least two major cities of order, okay? And it turned the entire populace into fanatic zealots that all they did was chant about how great the Black Star is, and it led them in a huge procession across the realm to go fight on this third city. We know the Stormcast fought them and basically kept them at bay while the religious arm of their army lured it into the realm gate. But what happened when it left? Did people snap out of their trance? Were they gone forever? Like, those are the details that I want to know. Because if it snapped them out of it, I'd be like, okay, then this thing has a very clear aura effect. Which it obviously does as well, but it can wear off, as opposed to it just breaks everyone who's near it permanently. Which would be terrifying, honestly, because that means one of these things could roll over any city and immediately flip its populace into being a self-sustaining army that is unstoppable. Like, not unstoppable in the literal sense, of course they can be killed, but I mean unstoppable in, like, by removing the Black Star, they are still crazy zealots who are trying to kill everything they see. So different vibes. And while this is a story with a lot more questions than answers, it is very cool, and I like the mystery. And so, I mean, let's honestly just wrap it up with talking about why is this cool, and that is why it's cool. It's a mystery. I would love to hear your thoughts on what it is. My working theory right now is that it is a incarnate of Ulgu, except they weren't ready to fully unveil the idea of the incarnates when this book came out, and so they left it as a bit of a mystery. The only thing that I can think of that really disputes that is I don't know much about Ulgu lore from Fantasy Battles. If you guys can tell me about it, like the Wind of Magic Ulgu, is there a zealot or I guess entrancing nature to it? Because I know, like, with the Gur stuff, a lot of those are like soft throwbacks to Fantasy Battles, like the full complete Winds of Magic that all have their own lores and stuff, and I don't know anything about that kind of stuff. So I would love to know, if you are an expert in Fantasy Battle Winds of Magic, tell me all about Ulgu as a magic, and I think that will give us a little bit of clarity on the realm itself. So that's my safe bet. My wild one is that this is just some crazy manifestation of Malarian that escaped from its prison cell, and it's just a little bit of a hiccup, but is a portent of other monsters to come, that he, in his machinations, wants to be loved by his population so much that he creates these monsters, nodes, black stars, if you will, to go around to various cities and force people to worship him, to become disciples of the shadow, if you will. That's my off-the-wall thing, right? That's my, if I could choose any outcome, and the camera shifts from Gur to Ulgu, and we're looking at this, I want a ton of black stars, because that makes every single city in Ulgu that doesn't belong to Malarian a liability. It's just pools of people who are ready to be used as zealots for Malarian. Does Malarian want to be loved or feared? Well, he wants people to be afraid of how much they love him. But I would love to hear your guys' theories. Again, there's no right or wrong, so don't correct people in the comments. I want to hear what you think it is. It's a story like we haven't seen before by anything. No real concrete information about the after effects of it or what happens when it leaves. So there's a lot of things up to interpretation. Tell me your thoughts in the comments down below. I will read and respond there. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and I will catch you next time. Happy wargaming.